Hey, good morning. Hope you guys are doing great this Friday. We are going to be in Acts chapter 22 today, and this is where finally we hear from Paul in his address to those in Jerusalem, something that he's been waiting to do. And we're kind of going to see in the chapters ahead just a series of moments where Paul is going to speak before Jews, and then he's going to be taken to Rome and actually spoken before kings. And this is again a part of the call that Paul had from Jesus, a really specific call that at his conversion, Jesus told him in a vision that he would teach not only Jews, but he would teach Gentiles, non Jewish people, and also kings and those in authority. So, hey, Robin, great to have you with me this morning. So, a lot's happened with Paul, and Paul, it's kind of gotten to this high fever pitch where he is now arrested. We don't see any of the apostles, any of the disciples at this moment. We just see Paul and getting taken to safety by the Roman police, if you will, in Jerusalem to save Paul from the Jewish people that really want to kill him. And now he says, "Brothers, fathers, listen to me, listen to my defense." So listen to my apologia, where we get the term apologetic. And he speaks this in Aramaic or Hebrew, their native language. And it says, "And when they heard him speak them in Aramaic," a lot of translations say Hebrew, "they became very quiet. Then Paul said, I am a Jew, born in Tarsus of Cilicia, but brought up in this city under Gamaliel. I was thoroughly trained in the law of our fathers." So he's giving him his degrees, if you will, a little bit of his background, but his education as well. So Paul was born outside of Israel, but he was raised within it, taught within it, under a particular professor, if you will, a particular rabbi named Gamaliel, very famous one in history, by the way. And Gamaliel said of Paul that he was just a very loved books, loved to read. So Paul mentions that he was trained under Gamaliel in the law in the Old Testament, and he was zealous of God for God. Zealous carries the idea of zeal, passion, right? As any of you are today. So just as you guys are zealous today, and you guys are arresting me or wanting me killed, so I had the same zeal as you guys. And I persecuted the followers of this way. I also persecuted the church. The church was called the Way back in the day. And it says he persecuted them to their death, arresting both men and women and throwing them into prison. So Paul lays out kind of just how zealous he was when he did not know Jesus. And he was a really zealous dude, man. He persecuted the church and he put men and women in prison. And as also the high priest and all the council can testify. So the high priest, the council, the Sanhedrin, all could testify of what Paul did. So Paul is speaking to people, a lot of people that know him or know of him. He was raised in education in Jerusalem. Could you now, knowing that background of Paul, it really makes the last chapter even more weirder, doesn't it? Because you kind of go, wow, he comes to James, the brother of Jesus, and the rest of the elders and the apostles that were there. Um, and what do they do? And they know everybody knows Paul. They know the Sanhedrin knows Paul. That's what Paul just says. The high priest and the council can testify to what I used to be, what I used to do. And what do? They throw him right into the temple. And they're all. I mean, all these Jewish people don't like Paul. James, the brother of Jesus, tells Paul that, hey, you're not liked by the Jews. And by the way, all the Jews are coming. A lot of them are coming to Jesus, thousands and thousands of them. But man, they don't want to give up the law. They want to keep in the law, and they don't like you because you're teaching Gentiles that they don't have to obey the law of God, the law of Moses. And so there was a super duper issue going on in the early church, one that I only can imagine that a lot of the New Testament books like Galatians and like the book of Hebrews are written to really combat. Um, and it says, I even obtained letters from them to the brothers in Damascus and went there to bring people as prisoners to Jerusalem to be punished. So he goes into length of how zealous he was to the length of going to Damascus and getting letters to bring people to Jerusalem to be punished. So Paul knew Jerusalem like the back of his hand, obviously. About noon I came near Damascus. Suddenly a bright light from heaven flashed around me. I fell to the ground and heard a voice saying to me, Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? Who are you, Lord? I am Jesus of Nazareth, whom you are persecuting. He replied, my companions saw the light, but they did not understand the voice to whom was speaking to me. What shall I do, Lord? I asked. Get up, the Lord said. Go into Damascus, where you will be told all that you have been assigned to do. My companions led me by the hand into Damascus because the brilliance of the light had blinded me. A man named Ananias came to see me. He was a devout observer of the law and highly respected by all the Jews living there. He stood beside me and said, Brother Saul, receive your sight. And at that very moment I was able to see him. And he said, the God of our father has chosen you to know his will and to see the righteous one, and to hear the words from his mouth. You will be his witness to all men of what you have seen and heard. And now, what are you waiting for? Get up and be baptized and wash your sins away, calling on his name. When I returned to Jerusalem and I was praying at the temple, I fell into a trance and saw the Lord speaking. Quick, he said to me, leave Jerusalem immediately, because they will not accept your testimony about me. Lord, I replied, these men know that I went from one synagogue to another to imprison and to beat those who believe in you. And when the blood of your martyr Stephen was shed, I stood there giving my approval and guarding the clothes of those who were killing him. Then the Lord said to me, go, I will send you far away into the Gentiles. So you get some really cool detail, don't you, into Paul's testimony here. And I really love this. Paul kind of breaks down his testimony, and hopefully, you have a testimony, right? This is what a testimony is. It's sharing how you came into a relationship with Jesus. For me, I have so many different cool parts to my testimony of how I came to know the guy from Nazareth, and that's what Paul's saying. This is how I came to know the man from Nazareth, man. This is how it happened. And he gives some really neat detail of his little dialogue with God in his little private time, right? He says, hey, God, these people are going to know me in Jerusalem, man. It'll work. It's going to work that I could minister to them. And God says, nope, you got to go, man. They're not going to receive your testimony. Now, Paul might have thought later on that they would receive his testimony as he went to the Gentile regions. He was excited to get back to Jerusalem for the Feast of Pentecost after his third missionary journey. And maybe he did think like, hey, now they might receive my testimony. But we'll see, right? How it's going to play out right now. Did they really receive his testimony? Now he's speaking to them and to the crowd. And it is kind of a highlight moment of Paul's life where he gets to speak to his brethren. He has wonderful terms of endearment, fathers, brothers, I speak to you. He's speaking in their language, their common language, if you will, the street language. And so, this is the time, for Paul to, he thinks, to be heard by them. Well, sometimes when we share our testimony with those that are closest to us, sometimes it don't work, and that's so true. And so don't be surprised. Sometimes people that are farther away from your home or farther away from your close relatives will be people that are going to hear you most. And I find that it's so true in a lot of people's life where it's difficult for their own family to hear your testimony, but wherever they've traveled or wherever they've moved to, those people really paid attention, and there was a lot of fruit that was bore through the testimony that was shared. And certainly that there's a part of that that I see in my own life too, coming from California to Arizona, and then seeing so much fruit take place here in Arizona. Um, and But other people, it works the other way. Some people have a wonderful fruit bearing time in their family, and we see that with Cornelius, let's say, where he comes to know God and his whole family does, and everybody just really has this impactful time, really cool experience, and all their testimonies are going to be really similar because they all kind of come to get saved at the same time. But for a lot of us, that's not the case. We're a lot like Paul, where we are from an area, we come to know Christ, and then we go out and we share our testimony somewhere else, and we see it's received, and sometimes it's because of our background, just in general. People have known us a long time. They might be skeptical of us. They might be upset at us by things that have happened in our life, and maybe how things used to be. However it is, there's different reasons why people maybe closest to us don't hear the testimony really clearly. And that's what we see with Paul. People knew Paul. People heard of Paul. Some people probably, even within the church, struggled with Paul because they knew Paul when he wasn't a Christian, and they remember Paul persecuting Stephen, and they might have been relatives of Stephen, or they might have known these people, these early deacons in the church. And so their families were skeptical maybe of Paul as well. And you could see where sometimes Paul he hung out in Jerusalem so much, and he was such an impactful guy, and his temperament was such where it was hard not to notice him, where it really affected people. And it led Paul to have a really fruitful ministry out and about, in these other areas, but it really fell on deaf ears when it was in his hometown. So hey, don't get so upset, when you find yourself being a little ineffective, because guess what? Paul the Apostle was too, and he wasn't that effective in his hometown. Not only was he not effective in his hometown, but Jeremiah wasn't too effective in his hometown, and Isaiah wasn't too effective. When you go down the list of how many of these guys was Amos really effective? Was Joel really effective? A lot of people didn't like these people, and we're told in the book of Hebrews that the prophets, a lot of them suffered a lot of persecution and martyrdom at the hands of their own brothers. And so just like it happened hundreds of years before Christ with the prophets, so you see Paul also getting the same welcome from his homies, if you will. And it says, the crowd listened to Paul until he said this. Then they raised their voices and shouted, "Rid the earth of him. He is not fit to be alive." Dude, that is hardcore, right? Can you imagine? Now, this is what kind of blows my mind here. It's hard for me to imagine where someone can just share something, like a belief, like, hey, this is really God, like a message like that. Like, hey, this is God, and we want you, I'm preaching to you to turn from your error of your ways and come to know this God. It's hard for me to think that just that preaching alone, people would say, "Rid the earth of him, he is not fit to live." And this is another lesson for me this morning, is that prejudice is something that is deeply rooted in us humans, through could be our culture, could be our close family, and could be our education as well. And it might have been all of those things that really affected these people, so much so where they looked at the preaching of Gentiles. When Paul says, "I will send you far away to the Gentiles," the crowd listened until he said that. Right when he said, "I will send you to the Gentiles," they raised their voices and shouted, "Rid the earth of him, he is not fit to live." When they heard that word Gentile during the Feast of Pentecost, where all the Jews and God-fearing Greeks came, when they heard the word Gentile, they went nuts. And to think that salvation can just come to those outsiders, those people out there, outside of Jerusalem, outside of the temple, to think that those people could know God, that was disgusting of a thought to them. And these are people that have been just inundated in a culture of prejudice. And it's sad to see, to think of how vicious human beings have been in our history, to wipe out other people simply because they weren't like them. And this is the legacy of us as human beings. And we have to be very careful that we don't say, rid the earth of them, they are not fit to live. We have to be very careful that we don't fall into this kind of superiority complex. Paul just mentions the word Gentiles, and they see it as, how could those Gentiles know God like us? No one knows God like us. And they saw themselves superior, and that superiority developed in their heart into racism, extreme pride, and extreme, prejudices that led them to hurt and to kill. And that is super scary to me to think, or it blows my mind. It makes me check my own heart too, and just go, man, who do I think I am? I mean, and I have to really look at my own heart and check myself before God. As they were shouting and throwing off their cloaks and flinging dust into the air, the commander ordered Paul to be taken into the barracks. He directed that they be flogged and questioned in order to find out why the people were shouting at him like this. They were confused. As they stretched him out to flog him, Paul said to the centurion standing there, "Is it legal for you to flog a Roman citizen who hasn't been found guilty?" So they're ready to rip open Paul's back for the sake of saying, man, dude, something's going on. This guy's not telling us something. Who knows? And they think he's just a Jew with not rights. But Paul says, hey, guess what? And this is the second time now he says, you know what? I'm a Roman citizen. And being a Roman citizen, you had rights. You could not strike a Roman citizen just for any reason. And so Paul says, you know what? You guys are going against your own law. And when the centurion heard this, he went to the commander and reported it. What are you going to do? He asked. This man is a Roman citizen. The commander went to Paul and asked, tell me, are you a Roman citizen? He said, yes, he answered. Then the commander said, I had to pay a big price for my citizenship. So the commander said, hey, I'm a Roman citizen, but I paid a price for mine. A lot of people won their citizenships in Rome through war, through acts of valor, through paying a price, through paying financially. And Paul says, I was born a citizen by birth. So Paul says, I was born a Roman citizen. So I have been a Roman citizen from an infant. So Paul's saying, I've been a Roman citizen my whole life. I didn't have to buy it. I didn't have to earn it through some kind of thing. And this probably shook up the commander quite a bit to know that a born Roman citizen is being mistreated like this. And those who were about to question him withdrew immediately. The commander himself was alarmed when he realized that he had put Paul, a Roman citizen, in chains. So now the Roman authorities are thinking, oh man, what's going to happen? Now, God's got a plan for Paul, and God's got a plan for us too, to get us to the finish line to what we're called to do. And he's going to get us there. And sometimes the plan is going to be a little different than we thought. Paul might have dreamed that his time in Jerusalem was going to be the wonderful sharing to everybody, and people were going to go, "Wow, Paul, that was awesome!" And man, we remember you, and man, you've changed so much, and man, that's so awesome, and it's so great to see you, and man, we're glad your life is doing well, and we're grateful. Instead, he hit a wall, and his words fell on deaf ears. No one wanted anything to do with it, man, and they were disgusted by him even thinking that other people could have the blessing that those in Jerusalem, experienced through the law of Moses. And so Paul here has this interesting situation where he either is going to get flogged and not say nothing about his Roman citizenship, or he's going to say something about his Roman citizenship, spare getting flogged. That sounds like a good thing, right? And then who knows where that's going to go. Now, it's going to lead him to, first of all, to his crew. This is so interesting. But they are going to put him before the chief priest, before the Jewish leaders, people that knew Paul really close. And we see kind of how this is going to look in chapter 23. So check this out. I want you to see this. Paul goes from outside the area of Israel and shares his faith to into Jerusalem, to those who are from all over Israel that are there for the Feast of Pentecost, a lot of people there, and he shares to all the Jewish people, all these Jewish people there. He gets this opportunity to share out loud. And now he's coming even more intimate, into an intimate setting where he's now going to be able to share with the Sanhedrin, those that have known him for a long time. And he's going to see them face to face. And now this is how it works so much in our lives, and I just love this, is that sometimes God takes us, we come to know Christ, he moves us outside, and then over time he brings us closer back, gets back, where all of a sudden we're hanging out with our family again. We're back into the fold. We're having opportunities closer to home now as time goes, and you see this happening. This is a long time after Paul's conversion. Paul spent 3 years in Arabia, or 10 years. This is some years later. We're talking 55, 56, 57 AD, somewhere in there, is this kind of time. So man, there's been some time here. Paul's been a Christian now for quite a while, and now he's finally getting close. He's going right back to his old crew, so to speak, and talking. And I love that. I love going back to the old junior high guys, or the old high school dudes, or I love going back and hanging out with my friends, and I couldn't do that at the beginning. And at the beginning, I needed to be out and doing different stuff and experiencing kind of that call that God put on my heart, and I saw fruit outside. But then as time has come, I've seen there's a lot of fruit closer to home too, and so I see something really neat there, and I hope maybe you can kind of testify to that in your own life as well. So really cool chapter. Chapter 23, we'll talk about Paul before the Sanhedrin. Wow, dude, that's really intense. And we're going to see how they react to Paul too, and it's going to be interesting. So you guys take care, okay? We'll see you next week, Lord willing. Okay, bye-bye.